The clinking of heavy crystal glasses and the low hum of the steakhouse felt oppressive. I stared at my bone-in ribeye, methodically pushing a piece of asparagus across the plate. It was my 30th birthday. I was the one who had spent weeks securing this reservation at Miller's, requesting the quiet corner booth. And as the black leather checkbook indicated, I was footing the extravagant bill. Yet looking across the table at my family, you would think I was a total stranger who had wandered in from the rain. My mother, Eleanor, was preoccupied with adjusting my sister's designer silk blouse. Chloe was 27, but my mother still treated her like a fragile doll that required constant polishing. "That color brings out the gold in your eyes, Chloe," my mother cooed, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Don't you think so, Richard?" My father grunted his agreement, swirling a $300 Cabernet in his glass. He didn't look up from his phone. "She looks like $1,000,000. Speaking of which, how is the new marketing campaign going, Pumpkin? Tell me they finally gave you the lead on the Henderson account." "They practically begged me to take it," Chloe said, tossing her blonde-streaked hair over her shoulder. "I told them I needed a dedicated team of 4 junior executives, and they didn't even blink." I sipped my sparkling water, the ice clinking loudly. I knew the Henderson account was a low-tier trial run dumped on the junior team, but I stayed quiet. I had learned long ago my role was to serve as the steady backdrop to Chloe's shining performance. "That's my girl," my father beamed, lifting his glass in a toast. He didn't glance my way. "Always closing the deal, always pushing forward." "Thanks, Daddy," she purred. Then her gaze slid toward me. Her eyes held that familiar glimmer of condescension. "And how are the little freelance gigs going, Maya, still scraping by with those simple website designs?" I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the conditioned reflex to defend myself. But I let my breath out slowly. I was a grown, independent African-American woman turning 30 today. I was done shrinking to make them feel big. "I'm keeping busy," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "The work is steady." My mother sighed. "Steady isn't thriving, Maya. We worry about you living out in your grandfather's old place. It's practically falling apart. It's really not safe for a single woman." "The house is fine, Mom. The foundation is solid." My father scoffed. "Solid? The roof leaked 3 years ago when the old man died. It's a money pit, Maya. A complete liability. We should have sold the land to developers and split the cash. Letting you squat there and play starving artist was the worst financial decision this family ever allowed." He conveniently forgot the legal reality that Grandpa had left the house exclusively to me. I hadn't stolen family property. It was a parting gift from the only man in this bloodline who looked at me and actually saw a person of value. I didn't argue. I simply reached for the leather checkbook, sliding my sleek black corporate card inside before closing it with a snap. I caught the waiter's eye, giving him a silent nod. "The house is taken care of," I said softly, looking directly into my father's eyes. The waiter arrived seamlessly, picking up the folio with a polite bow. "I'll take care of this right away, miss," he murmured. My parents didn't pause to acknowledge the transaction happening right next to them. My father was already leaning across the white linen tablecloth, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He clearly thought the clatter of the busboy clearing the neighboring table was masking his words. He thought I was too busy staring out the window to notice. He was dead wrong. I had spent a lifetime learning how to read the toxic shifts in this family's dynamics. I saw the aggressive tilt of his jaw and caught the sharp, greedy gleam in his eye. "Listen to me," my father muttered, his voice barely carrying over the smooth jazz playing overhead. He kept his eyes fixed intensely on Chloe. "While she's sitting right here totally oblivious, I want you to go over there right now." Chloe frowned, leaning in closer. "Go where?" "To the old man's house," he hissed, his face flushing with a dark intensity. "While everyone is sitting right here at dinner, have a locksmith come over and change every single lock on her apartment doors. I know a guy who works late-night emergency calls. I'll text you his direct number right now." Chloe's eyes widened dramatically. A thrill of malicious excitement washed over her features. She glanced quickly at me out of the corner of her eye, checking to see if I was listening, then looked quickly back to our father. "Change the locks." "Dad, are you serious? We can really do that." "I am dead serious," he whispered harshly, his tone absolute. "I am sick and tired of her tying up valuable family assets. We lock her out tonight. Tomorrow morning I have my lawyer start formal eviction proceedings. We take back Grandpa's house from her once and for all. Do not argue with me. Go. Do it now." Chloe didn't need to be told twice. The prospect of pulling the rug out from under me on my 30th birthday was too intoxicating to pass up. She sat up straight, clearing her throat loudly. "Oh, shoot," she said, picking up her smartphone and pretending to read an urgent text message. "You guys, I am so incredibly sorry. It's my boss. There is a massive emergency with the Henderson rollout. They need me down at the office immediately to put out a fire." My mother gasped. "On a Friday night, Chloe, that is terrible. I wish they could—" Chloe sighed heavily, already standing up and grabbing her leather trench coat from the back of the chair. She shot me an apologetic look that was so fake it practically shimmered. "Maya, I am so sorry to bail on your birthday dinner, but duty calls. I just can't say no." "I understand completely," I said, offering her a calm smile that revealed absolutely nothing of what I was truly feeling. "Drive safe, Chloe." "Happy birthday again," she called out, already hurrying toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply as she rushed off to steal my home. I watched her go, feeling a strange, freezing cold calm settling deep over my bones. I picked up my wine glass by the crystal stem, taking a slow, deliberate sip. "Such a dedicated worker," my father said, leaning back against the booth with an arrogant sigh. "She's going to run that company someday." "She really is incredible," my mother agreed eagerly, taking a delicate sip of her wine. She finally turned to me, a patronizing softness in her gaze. "Don't feel bad that you aren't like her, Maya. Not everyone is built for high-stress demanding environments. You have your freelance projects to keep you busy. That's nice too." "It is nice," I agreed quietly, placing my glass gently back onto the table. The waiter returned silently, placing the receipt folder softly on the table. I signed my name with a steady hand, adding a generous tip. The total was nearly $800. My father didn't offer to split it. He didn't even look at the receipt. He was too busy checking his watch, calculating how long it would take Chloe to reach my property. For the next 60 minutes, I sat in the warm light of the steakhouse. I engaged my parents in polite, utterly meaningless conversation. We talked about the unseasonably cold weather. We discussed the specific floral arrangements for my mother's upcoming charity gala. We debated the merits of the dessert menu. They smiled at me, entirely convinced they had me trapped. They honestly thought they had finally outsmarted the quiet family scapegoat. They believed that by the time this dinner was over, I would be standing on the sidewalk in the rain with nowhere to go. But I remained perfectly serene. I knew exactly what Chloe was driving toward. I pictured her pulling up to the old neighborhood, stepping into the freezing night air. I imagined the emergency locksmith arriving in his battered van, ready to drill out the old brass deadbolts that Grandpa had installed 30 years ago. I pictured Chloe walking proudly up the cracked concrete steps, fully expecting to find the peeling paint and rotting wood of a neglected, worthless liability. I imagined the exact moment she realized the truth. An hour slowly passed. The waiter brought over a small complimentary slice of dark chocolate cake, complete with a single flickering birthday candle stuck in the center. I closed my eyes for a brief second and blew it out without bothering to make a wish. I already had exactly what I wanted in this world. Just as my father was casually waving the waiter down to order a double espresso, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open with a violent rush of cold street air. Chloe walked in. She wasn't walking with her usual arrogant stride. She was moving stiffly, mechanically, almost as if her brain had forgotten how her legs worked. As she stumbled closer, the ambient light of the restaurant illuminated her face. She was completely drained of all color. Her skin was a sickly ashen gray, significantly paler than the crisp white tablecloth draped in front of us. She was trembling uncontrollably, a fine, violent, full-body shudder that audibly rattled the expensive fabric of her trench coat. Her eyes were wide, dilated, and glassy. She looked absolutely profoundly terrified. My mother noticed her first, her coffee cup pausing halfway to her open mouth. "Chloe, honey, what's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. What happened at the office?" Chloe didn't answer her. She didn't even look in my direction. She bypassed her empty seat completely, stepping directly into my father's personal space with a frantic, jerky movement. She gripped the polished wooden edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned a stark, bony white. She leaned down awkwardly, bringing her trembling, pale lips mere inches from his ear. The smug, victorious, arrogant smirk on my father's face began to melt away instantly as he took in the sheer, unadulterated panic radiating from his favorite golden child daughter. Chloe swallowed hard, a visible gulp, her breath catching painfully in her throat as she closed her eyes and whispered, "Dad, there's—" The restaurant noise faded into a dull, distant roar. I watched my father's face contort from smug superiority to absolute confusion. Chloe was shaking so hard the water in my mother's glass vibrated with every tremor of her hand. She couldn't finish her sentence. The words were choked behind a wall of absolute terror. Seeing my golden child sister reduced to a stammering mess should have felt like a victory. Instead, it just felt like a heavy, inevitable truth. This moment had been building for 20 years. Growing up in our house meant learning your place early and learning it hard. Chloe was the investment. I was the tax write-off. My parents spared no expense to cultivate Chloe's pristine image. There were private tennis lessons, expensive tutors, and cars bought brand new with giant red bows on the driveway. She was groomed for greatness, polished, and presented to the world as the ultimate achievement of the family line. I was treated like an inconvenient roommate. When I asked for help to buy a used laptop for a coding class in high school, my father handed me a stack of job applications for local fast food joints. He told me that people with my limited potential needed to learn the value of $1 early on. I learned it all right. I worked double shifts smelling like fryer grease and industrial cleaner, while Chloe complained loudly about the specific shade of leather in her new convertible. My parents practically trained her to view me as a servant. She would leave her dirty dishes on my bed, and my mother would scold me for not cleaning them up fast enough to keep the house presentable. The only person who didn't look at me like a disappointment was Grandpa Marcus. He was a quiet, observant man with calloused hands and a mind like a steel trap. He saw right through my parents' superficial obsession with status and wealth. He used to sit with me on the wraparound porch of his house in the historic district. It was a sprawling, beautiful property that my father constantly complained was an outdated eyesore. Grandpa would drink his black coffee and watch me sketch wireframes and write lines of code in my cheap spiral notebooks. He told me I had an architect's mind. He said I saw the foundation of things while everyone else was completely distracted by the paint. He made me feel brilliant. He made me feel like I belonged somewhere. When he passed away 3 years ago, the family circled his estate like starving vultures. My father had already drawn up architectural plans to bulldoze Grandpa's historic house and sell the double lot to a luxury condo developer. He had already promised Chloe the down payment for a downtown penthouse out of the projected profits. They were measuring the drapes before the ground had even settled at the cemetery. But Grandpa Marcus was 10 steps ahead of them. The day the lawyer read the will, my father nearly choked on his expensive scotch. Grandpa didn't leave the property to his son. He left the deed exclusively to me. The family outrage was instant, toxic, and deafening. My mother accused me of manipulating a dying, confused man. Chloe threw a tantrum that lasted for weeks, screaming that I was a thief. But my father quickly changed his tune when he looked at the overdue property taxes and the supposed structural damage listed in the inspection reports. He laughed right in my face. He told me the house was a financial death trap, a rotting money pit that would bankrupt me within a year. He practically dared me to move in. He was betting real money that I would come crawling to him for a bailout just so he could take the land from me for pennies. They thought they had handed me a heavy iron anchor to drown with. They had no idea they had just handed me an empire. For the past 3 years, my family believed I was a struggling, desperate freelance web designer. They believed I was shivering in a drafty, crumbling house, eating instant noodles and barely keeping the lights on. Every condescending comment at every holiday dinner was based on that comfortable, pathetic fiction. They loved the idea of me failing. It validated their entire narrative about who I was. But reality was an entirely different story. I hadn't been sitting in a rotting house feeling sorry for myself. I had been working 80-hour weeks. I had taken the small cash inheritance Grandpa left me and leveraged it into a tech startup focused on commercial real estate acquisitions. That drafty old house was completely gutted and rebuilt from the inside out. Behind the historic, unassuming exterior was a state-of-the-art server farm and the heavily fortified headquarters of my company. I wasn't barely scraping by. I was the founder and CEO of a holding firm that was currently valued at over $40 million. I had a team of elite developers and aggressive corporate lawyers on permanent retainer. I owned massive commercial properties in 3 different states. I had secured government contracts that my father's country club friends could only dream of touching. The house on Elm Street wasn't just my home anymore. It was a fortress. It was registered to a nameless corporate LLC, protected by military-grade security systems and monitored by cameras that tracked every single movement on the property. I had spent years quietly amassing wealth, power, and undeniable leverage, all while my family busied themselves picking out matching holiday sweaters and mocking my cheap shoes. The sharp clatter of a dropped fork snapped my attention back to the present moment. The steakhouse was still humming with oblivious, happy diners, but our booth was suffocating under a thick, heavy blanket of panic. My father grabbed Chloe by the arm. His fingers dug deeply into the fabric of her expensive trench coat. He gave her a rough, demanding shake, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hiss. "Chloe, snap out of it. What are you talking about? What is there? Did you change the locks or not?" Chloe finally pulled her gaze away from the white tablecloth. She looked at my father with eyes completely hollowed out by fear. She looked like a woman who had just walked to the edge of the world and stared straight down into the dark abyss. She slowly shook her head, a jerky mechanical movement that made her blonde hair tremble. "I couldn't," she whispered, her voice cracking painfully. The locksmith took one look at the door and packed up his tools. He refused to touch it. He said he would go to federal prison. My mother let out a sharp little gasp, pressing her linen napkin to her mouth. Prison. For changing a simple deadbolt on a residential house, Chloe. You are not making any sense. You are being hysterical. "It's not a house anymore, Mom." Chloe choked out a tear, finally spilling over her dark lashes and ruining her perfect makeup. "There are cameras watching everything. The windows are tinted, reinforced glass. There is a massive steel security gate hidden behind the old oak door. And there's a plaque." My father's face was turning a dangerous, volatile shade of crimson. "A plaque? What plaque?" I sat perfectly still, listening to the smooth jazz playing gently over the restaurant speakers. I felt the cool, heavy crystal of my water glass against my fingertips. I didn't interrupt her. I wanted to hear her say it. I needed them to understand exactly what they had so arrogantly walked into. My mind drifted away from their rising panic, floating back to a quiet hospital room 3 years ago. I remembered the quiet hum of the medical machines and the smell of sterile cotton. A memory of Grandpa handing me a mysterious key before he died, warning me, "Don't let them take what is yours." There's, it's not a house anymore. Chloe finally choked out her voice, trembling so violently, it sounded like she was standing in freezing rain. My father's grip on her arm tightened his knuckles, turning a stark, bony white. The memory of Grandpa's raspy voice warning me not to let them take what was mine echoed in my mind, anchoring me to the present. I sat perfectly still in the warm glow of the steakhouse, listening to the smooth jazz overhead as my sister's perfectly manicured facade completely disintegrated. "What do you mean it's not a house?" My father demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl that cut through the ambient noise of clinking crystal and quiet conversation. "Speak English, Chloe. Did you change the locks or not?" Chloe swallowed hard, a visible gulp that made her throat jump. Her eyes darted frantically around the room before finally landing on me. She looked like she was staring at a complete stranger, her pupils dilated with a mixture of shock and sheer panic. "The locksmith wouldn't even touch the door, Dad," she whimpered, her pristine blonde hair falling into her face as she leaned heavier against the edge of our booth. "He took one look at the perimeter and packed up his tools. He said the security system was military grade. He said tampering with a commercial fortress like that was a federal offense." My mother let out a sharp, confused breath. Her hand flew to her throat, her manicured fingers pressing against her pearl necklace. "A commercial fortress, Chloe. What on earth are you talking about? It's just a rundown shack in the historic district." "It's not a shack, Mom." Chloe's voice rose, bordering on hysterical. Heads turned at nearby tables, but she was entirely too panicked to care about social graces. "The old wood siding is gone. There are high-definition security cameras tracking every inch of the property. The windows are tinted reinforced glass. There is a massive steel security gate hidden behind the old oak door. He literally drove away and left me standing on the sidewalk. He said he wasn't going to federal prison for a residential lockout." My father let go of Chloe's arm and turned his full, furious attention on me. The veins in his neck were pulsing against his expensive silk tie. His face was turning a volatile, dangerous shade of crimson. "What have you done?" he hissed, leaning across the white linen tablecloth. His eyes were wide with a sudden blinding rage. "You took advantage of a dying, confused old man. You forged legal documents to put some fake company name on family property." I picked up my cloth napkin and gently dabbed the corner of my mouth. The fabric felt incredibly soft. Inside, I felt incredibly calm. The anxiety that used to paralyze me whenever my father raised his voice was completely gone. "I didn't forge anything," I said quietly, keeping my tone perfectly level. Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing. That was the breaking point. The exact moment the match hit the gasoline. My father's deeply ingrained arrogance detonated right there in the middle of the restaurant. "You little thief!" He spat, his voice rising in volume. I could smell the sharp, expensive tang of his Cabernet on his breath. "You think you can play games with me? You think you can do illegal, unpermitted renovations on my father's estate just to keep us out? I had architectural blueprints drawn up for that land. I had luxury developers ready to break ground. And you think you can just squat there behind some cheap cameras?" I sat back against the leather booth. I let his anger wash over me, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, deep satisfaction. This was the exact dynamic I had endured my entire life. Any time I had something of value, any time I achieved a tiny shred of independence, it was immediately labeled as theirs. They genuinely believed I existed only to serve as a convenient placeholder for their ambitions. "It's not your father's estate anymore," I replied, my voice steady and smooth. "It hasn't been part of the family trust for 3 years." My mother gasped loudly. She instantly weaponized her guilt, slipping effortlessly into her favorite role of the wounded, long-suffering peacemaker. She reached across the table, her diamond bracelets clinking against the fine china, and tried to place her hand over mine. I smoothly pulled my hand away, resting it in my lap. "Maya," How could you say such a thing? My mother pleaded, her voice trembling with manufactured tears. After everything we've done for you, we put a roof over your head, we raised you, and you scam your own grandfather on his deathbed. You are tearing this family apart on your own birthday. I didn't scam anyone, Mom, I said, refusing to be pulled into her emotional undertow. I respected his wishes. He wanted the house protected, so I protected it. You need to fix this right now, my mother demanded, the soft maternal act vanishing in an instant, replaced by a cold, hard edge. You need to hand over those keys right now, Maya. Give your father the deed so he can fix whatever legal mess you've made. We just want to help you manage it. You know you can't handle a property like that on your own. I am stepping in, my father announced, puffing out his chest, trying to reclaim his authority over the table. He pointed a thick finger directly at my face. I am stepping in to save this family from your incompetence. You are a broke, struggling freelance designer. You cannot afford to maintain a historic property, let alone pay for whatever illegal security system you've installed. You are going to bankrupt the family name. Just then, the waiter approached our table. He looked incredibly nervous, clearly sensing the toxic, heavy tension radiating from our booth. He held the black leather check folio tightly against his chest, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Pardon me," the waiter murmured, his eyes darting between my furious father, my weeping sister, and my rigid mother. "Whenever you are ready, miss." My father didn't even look at the man. He was too busy glaring holes through me, his chest heaving with arrogant, self-righteous breaths. He honestly believed he was winning. He believed that his loud voice and his aggressive posture would terrify me into submission, just like it always had when I was a teenager. He thought I was cornered, but I wasn't cornered. I was the one holding the cage. I reached into my designer purse. I bypassed my keys, my phone, and my lipstick. I slid out my heavy, matte black corporate credit card. It wasn't standard plastic. It was a solid brushed metal card reserved exclusively for high net worth commercial accounts. It was the exact kind of elite financial status symbol my father had spent his entire career trying to qualify for, only to be repeatedly denied by his bankers. I placed it gently onto the waiter's silver tray. It didn't flutter. It landed with a sharp, heavy, undeniable thud. My father's eyes flicked downward at the sound. I watched his gaze lock onto the card resting on the silver tray. I saw the exact moment his brain tried to process what he was looking at. He saw the solid metal edge. He saw the sleek minimalist design. He saw the words Apex Holdings LLC engraved in crisp silver lettering right beneath my name. But his rage was blinding him to the truth. His massive ego simply wouldn't allow his brain to connect the dots. He probably assumed it was a fake or some cheap prepaid debit card I had dressed up to look important. "I'm paying for this dinner," I said to the waiter, offering him a polite, warm smile that starkly contrasted the hostility of my family. "Please put the entire table on this and add a 30% gratuity for your trouble tonight." "Right away, miss," the waiter breathed, looking profoundly relieved as he hurried away from the table. "Do not ignore me, Maya," my father demanded, his voice dropping into a menacing guttural register. "I am not asking you again. Give me the keys to that house. I am going to call my lawyer first thing Monday morning. We are going to have the courts invalidate whatever fraudulent paperwork you tricked my father into signing." "You can call whoever you want," I said, folding my hands neatly on the pristine white tablecloth. "But you can't step into something that doesn't belong to you." "It is my birthright," he roared, finally losing the last shred of his carefully cultivated public composure. He slammed his heavy fist down onto the table. The silverware rattled sharply against the plates. The crystal wine glasses shook, spilling dark drops of red wine onto the linen. The entire restaurant went dead silent. Diners at other tables stopped chewing. Waiters froze in their tracks. Chloe whimpered, shrinking back into the booth, her arms wrapped around herself. My mother covered her face with her hands, utterly mortified by the public scene, her obsession with appearances finally shattered. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't shrink myself to make him feel powerful. I simply looked at the man who had spent my entire life making me feel small, and I felt a profound, unwavering sense of peace. The waiter returned silently, keeping his eyes averted as he placed the receipt folder softly on the table. I picked up the heavy metal pen signed my name with a steady, elegant sweep of my hand and tucked my black card back into my purse. "It is family property." My father hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and ragged with desperation. "You are going to give me the deed, and you are going to pack your bags tonight." I slowly reached back into my bag. My fingers brushed against the thick, crisp manila envelope I had brought with me tonight, the one I had prepared specifically for this exact moment, the one I knew I would need when their inevitable greed finally pushed them over the edge. I pulled it out. It was heavy, packed with ironclad proof of my absolute ownership. I looked directly into my father's furious, arrogant eyes. I let the envelope slip from my fingers. It hit the table with a heavy, satisfying slap, landing right next to the spilled red wine. I pushed it slowly across the linen toward him, dropping a stack of heavily redacted legal documents on the dinner table, with a calm, knowing smile. The heavy thud of the manila envelope against the table seemed to suck the remaining oxygen right out of the room. I watched my father's eyes dart from my face down to the thick stack of papers. He didn't reach for them. His hands remained frozen near his spilled Cabernet. It was as if touching the documents would make them real, and his ego simply could not afford that reality. Chloe leaned over her trembling fingers, pulling back the top page. Her eyes frantically scanned the dense legal jargon, the heavy black redactions, and the undeniable stamps of county clerks and state officials. She didn't understand the corporate LLC structures or the complex holding companies, but she understood the embossed seal of a finalized sale. "This is garbage," my father finally growled. He snatched the papers from Chloe's hand and tossed them aggressively back onto the white linen tablecloth. "You printed some nonsense off the internet to scare us. You probably mocked this up on one of your little freelance design programs. Do you honestly think I'm an idiot, Maya?" "I think you're a man who doesn't know when to read the writing on the wall," I said. I stood up smoothly, slipping the strap of my purse over my shoulder. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. She grabbed Chloe by the arm, her face a mask of manufactured horror and social embarrassment. "We are leaving this instant, Richard. I will not sit here in public and be threatened by my own daughter on her birthday." They stormed out of the restaurant in a flurry of expensive winter coats and righteous indignation. They left the documents sitting right there next to the spilled wine. I didn't bother picking them up. I had a vault full of copies safely secured at the office. The real war began less than 48 hours later. My phone started vibrating on my nightstand at 6 in the morning on Sunday and didn't stop for 3 days. My father had clearly spent his entire weekend weaponizing the extended family against me. The family group chat, which I had muted for my own peace of mind months ago, was suddenly flooded with a relentless, toxic barrage of vitriol. My Aunt Denise accused me of elder abuse, claiming I had deliberately brainwashed Grandpa Marcus when his mind was failing. My cousin Marcus, the same man who used to beg me to fix his computer for free, called me a greedy vulture who was trying to steal Chloe's rightful inheritance. Text after text painted me as a monster. They called me a criminal, a bitter scapegoat who was finally taking her petty revenge on the generous people who had clothed and fed her. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee, reading the messages one by one. The morning light streamed through the reinforced tinted glass of my heavily secured home. Not a single person asked for my side of the story. Not one relative paused to question if my father's frantic, furious narrative made any logical sense. They were all entirely too eager to tear me down. They were comfortable keeping me in the tiny, pathetic box they had built for me. Then the heavy envelope arrived in the mail. It was a formal cease and desist letter from a notoriously aggressive downtown law firm. The thick packet of papers threatened me with a massive civil lawsuit for fraud, coercion, and illegal possession of estate assets. The sheer volume of the legal threats was clearly meant to terrify me into submission. They wanted to drown me in anxiety and legal jargon before I even set foot in a courtroom. Just as I was setting the legal threat down on my granite counter, my phone rang loudly in the quiet kitchen. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow, calming breath before sliding my finger across the screen. "Maya," she breathed into the receiver. Her voice was thick and trembling, dripping with that soft maternal disappointment she had perfected over 3 decades. "Please tell me you're ready to end this absolute madness." "I didn't start it, Mom," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "You are tearing this family apart," she cried, a delicate practiced sob catching in the back of her throat. "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. Chloe hasn't slept in days. She was supposed to be moving into that house to celebrate her new promotion. We are your blood, Maya. How can you be so incredibly selfish?" I gripped the edge of the counter tightly. The familiar sting of total familial betrayal burned in the back of my throat. It didn't matter how old I got or how much quiet wealth I accumulated. The painful realization that my mother would always choose their comfort over my survival still felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. I was entirely alone. No one in this bloodline was on my side. "I bought the house legally, Mom. Grandpa sold it to me at fair market value to save the estate from bankruptcy. Dad knows that. The lawyers know that." "He knows you manipulated a sick, dying old man," she snapped. The soft, weeping facade vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, hard edge. "Sign the house over to Chloe, Maya. Keep the peace for once in your life. If you don't surrender the deed by Friday, your father is going to destroy your little freelance career. He is calling your clients. He will ruin your reputation and you will lose everything." She hung up before I could reply, the dial tone buzzing loudly in my ear. I didn't wait until Friday. I directed my team to schedule an in-person mediation meeting with their aggressive attorney the very next morning. The law office of Sterling and Vance was explicitly designed to intimidate. Everything was dark mahogany, heavy leather seating, and sweeping unobstructed views of the city skyline. I was escorted by a silent paralegal into a massive glass-walled conference room. My father was already sitting at the head of the long table. He was wearing his best-tailored suit, radiating absolute arrogant confidence. His lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Vance, sat directly beside him. Vance didn't stand when I walked into the room. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He looked at me with the weary, condescending disdain of a principal dealing with a slow, uneducated child. I took a seat opposite them, folding my hands neatly in my lap. I wore a simple, understated black dress. I didn't bring a briefcase, a purse, or a single piece of paper. I just sat silently, letting them lay all their cards on the table. "Miss Williams," Vance began. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair and steepled his fingers, staring down his nose at me. "Your father has graciously authorized me to offer you a one-time, extremely generous settlement. You will sign a quitclaim deed transferring the property back to the family trust today. In exchange, he will waive his right to pursue you for the back rent you owe for illegally occupying the premises." I sat perfectly still, letting his ridiculous words hang in the sterile, air-conditioned air of the boardroom. Vance sighed heavily, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the polished wood. "Let's not play games, young lady. We know you are a freelance web designer with zero actual assets. I will tie you up in aggressive litigation for the next 10 years. I will bleed you dry with legal fees until you are living on the street. Sign the surrender agreement." My father leaned back, a smug, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He pulled his smartphone from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table with a heavy thud. I told you, Maya, my father said smoothly, his eyes gleaming with greedy anticipation. You are completely out of your depth. You cannot afford to fight us. Give me the keys right now, and maybe I'll let you stay in the basement for a few weeks until you find a cheap apartment. I looked at Vance, offering him a polite, chillingly serene smile. I am not signing anything today or ever. If you want the house, you can contact my legal representation. All future communication goes directly through them. Vance scoffed out loud, shaking his head in disbelief. And who exactly is your representation, Miss Williams? Which local pro bono public defender did you manage to scrape together to stall us? I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my dress with absolute calm. I looked directly into my father's eyes, watching the arrogant smirk plastered across his face. Harrison Bradley, I said quietly. The name hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Vance's patronizing smirk froze entirely, the blood instantly draining from his sharp features. My father, completely oblivious to the sudden heavy tension radiating from his seasoned attorney, let out a loud, mocking laugh. He picked up his smartphone with a theatrical sigh, unlocking the screen to dial his main corporate counsel. He was eager to brag about my impending surrender. I'll call my lead guy right now and tell him to draft the eviction papers. My father chuckled. He pressed the phone to his ear with a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Let's see how fast this Harrison nobody backs down when we press him. I stood silently by the heavy glass door, watching my father wait for the call to connect. I watched his smug smile stretch across his face, absolutely certain he had finally won. I watched him open his mouth to deliver his gloating punchline. And then I watched his face drop completely as he heard who my legal representation actually was. The blinking red light on my kitchen answering machine felt like a warning beacon. I pressed the play button, leaning against the cold marble of the island. Maya, hi, it's David from the downtown floral shop. The voice hesitated, thick with an awkward, heavy discomfort. Your dad called me this morning. He sounded really frantic. He told me you were going through a severe mental health breakdown and that you've been stealing money from the family. I stopped breathing. The kitchen was dead silent, save for the mechanical hum of the machine. He warned me not to renew my website contract with you. David's voice continued, sounding deeply apologetic. I know it's really none of my business, Maya, but I just wanted to check in. Please let me know if you're okay. The machine beeped immediately, launching into a second message. It was Sarah, a local bakery owner I had done graphic design for years ago. The message was nearly identical. My father had called her too, spinning the exact same malicious lies. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning a stark white. He must have found an old box of my college invoices in the attic. He was systematically calling every small business owner I had ever worked with in my 20s. This wasn't just a legal dispute anymore. My father was actively launching a smear campaign to destroy my professional reputation. He genuinely believed I was a struggling paycheck-to-paycheck freelancer, relying on these local mom-and-pop shops to keep my lights on. He was trying to starve me out. He wanted to ruin my livelihood so completely that I would have no choice but to surrender. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it felt like a physical blow to the chest. These were my parents. The people who were supposed to protect me were actively trying to burn my life to the ground. They wanted to humiliate me in my own community, painting me as an unstable thief, just to force me to hand over the keys to Grandpa's house so Chloe could have a new living room. I sank onto the kitchen stool, burying my face in my hands. The heavily fortified walls of my home suddenly felt like a massive, quiet tomb. I was completely, utterly isolated. The extended family group chat was a constant stream of venom. The aunt who used to bake me birthday cakes had blocked my number. My cousins were posting passive-aggressive quotes about cutting off toxic family members, aiming every single word directly at me. I was the villain in a narrative they had entirely fabricated. A deep, hollow ache settled behind my ribs. It was the specific, agonizing grief of mourning people who were still breathing. I hadn't just lost my family, I was being actively hunted by them. The pain was so sharp, so relentlessly heavy, that I honestly wondered how much more my heart could take. I grabbed my car keys from the bowl by the door. I didn't bother fixing my makeup or changing out of my oversized gray sweatshirt. I just needed to leave the house. I needed to be near the only person in my bloodline who had ever truly loved me. The drive to Oakwood Cemetery was a blur of gray skies and damp, empty streets. A bitter autumn wind whipped through the neat rows of granite headstones as I put the car in park. I pulled my jacket tight across my chest, walking the familiar winding gravel path up the gentle hill to Grandpa Marcus's grave. The brass plaque was simple and understated exactly the way he had wanted it. I knelt on the wet grass, resting my bare fingers against the cold metal of his name. The dam inside me finally broke. Tears spilled hot and fast over my eyelashes, burning my cold cheeks. I wept for the mother who couldn't love me without conditions attached. I cried for the father who viewed my independence as a personal insult to his authority. I cried for the sister who was eager to step on my neck to elevate herself. Most of all, I cried because I was so incredibly tired of having to be the strong one. "Is it even worth it, Grandpa?" I whispered, my voice cracking into the quiet open air. "Should I just give them the deed? Let them have the house. Maybe if I just walk away and let Chloe take it, the hurting will stop." I closed my eyes, letting the freezing wind bite at my wet face. I waited for an answer in the heavy silence of the graveyard. I wanted a sign. I wanted permission to surrender. Instead, a memory washed over me, vivid and warm. I was 14 years old, sitting on the back porch steps of his old house. I had come to him crying because my mother had forced me to withdraw my application for an advanced coding camp to pay for Chloe's expensive cheerleading uniforms. I had told him I was just going to stop trying, that it was easier to shrink and stay out of Chloe's way than to fight for my own space. Grandpa had knelt down, taking my tear-stained face in his large, calloused hands. His eyes had been fierce and unwavering. "Maya," his deep, gravelly voice echoed in my memory. "You never shrink yourself to make insecure people comfortable. You have a builder's mind. You are laying a foundation they cannot even comprehend yet. If they want to live in a fragile house, let them. But don't you dare tear down your own bricks just to hand them the mortar." I opened my eyes. The tears had stopped falling. The profound, suffocating sorrow in my chest was suddenly replaced by a slow, radiating heat. My grandfather had entrusted me with his legacy because he knew I was the only one in the family strong enough to carry it. He knew my father would eventually try to tear it down for a quick profit, and he knew I had the spine to stop him. Giving up wouldn't heal my family. It would only validate their abuse. If I surrendered the house to my father, I wasn't buying peace. I was just paying for my own continued subjugation. I wiped my face roughly with the back of my sleeve. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs. The sadness was still there, a deep bruise that would take a very long time to heal, but the crippling doubt was completely gone. I wasn't the scared, neglected little girl they thought they could bully into a corner anymore. I was a grown woman, a successful CEO, and I was going to protect what was mine. "I won't let them tear it down." I promised the headstone, my voice firm and absolute in the quiet cemetery. "I promise you." I stood up, brushing the damp grass from my knees, and walked back to my car with a clear mind and a hardened heart. I drove back across the city, pulling up to the reinforced steel gates of my property. I felt the familiar, grounding sense of security wash over me as the hidden cameras tracked my vehicle and the heavy gates smoothly parted. I parked in the circular driveway and walked up the front concrete steps, pausing at the heavy wrought iron mailbox mounted by the reinforced oak door. I unlocked the metal box and pulled out a small stack of mail. Most of it was standard corporate junk mail addressed to my holding company, but one piece immediately caught my eye. It was a thick, pristine white envelope sent via certified mail. The bold return address in the corner belonged to Sterling and Vance, my father's aggressive new downtown law firm. I stepped into the warm foyer, locking the heavy deadbolts behind me. My thumb slid under the paper flap, tearing it open with a sharp, pulling sound. I pulled out the crisp, legally stamped pages, my eyes scanning the dense, aggressive legal text. I stood perfectly still in the quiet foyer as I opened a formal eviction notice drafted by my dad's new lawyer, citing an obscure loophole in the estate transfer. I traced the raised embossed seal on the eviction notice with my thumb. The heavy legal jargon was explicitly designed to evoke terror. Sterling and Vance had thrown around aggressive terms like fraudulent transfer elder exploitation and immediate surrender of premises. A few years ago, holding a threatening letter like this would have sent me into a blind, suffocating panic. I would have been crying on the phone with my mother, begging for her to mediate. I would have been agonizing over how to scrape together enough freelance money just to hire a basic public defender. But right now, standing in the quiet, climate-controlled warmth of my fortified foyer, I didn't feel an ounce of fear. The tears I had shed at Grandpa's grave were the very last ones my family would ever extract from me. The hollow ache in my chest had hardened into solid steel. I folded the thick parchment neatly in half and slid it back into its crisp white envelope. It was time to go to work. I stepped out of my house and drove downtown, leaving the quiet, historic residential district behind. As I navigated toward the commercial center, the skyline of towering glass and steel rose up to meet me. I bypassed the public parking garages and pulled my car down a private ramp, swiping my security badge to enter the reserved underground facility of the Apex building. The security guard at the private elevator bank nodded respectfully, standing a little straighter as I approached. "Good morning, Ms. Williams." "Good morning, David," I replied, stepping into the sleek mirrored car. I pressed the button for the 40th floor. When the silver doors slid silently open, the quiet, focused hum of a highly efficient multi-million-dollar operation surrounded me. Sunlight poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the pristine, minimalist design of my company's headquarters. The words, "Apex Holdings, LLC," were etched discreetly into the frosted glass of the reception area. "Good morning, Maya," my executive assistant Elena said smoothly, falling into step beside me as I walked down the hall. She handed me my preferred black coffee and a customized tablet. "Harrison and Elias are already waiting for you in the main boardroom." I forwarded them the scanned copy of the document you sent over this morning. "Thank you, Elena," I said, taking a sip of the hot coffee. "Please hold all my calls for the next hour, even the overseas acquisitions." I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. This was my sanctuary. This was the empire I had built in the shadows with 80-hour work weeks, relentless networking, and the brilliant foundational mind Grandpa Marcus had nurtured while my parents were busy ignoring me. Harrison Bradley. My lead corporate litigator was leaning back in a plush leather chair. He was a shark in a tailored Italian suit, a man whose reputation for ruthlessly dismantling aggressive lawsuits was legendary in this city's financial district. Sitting across from him was Elias, my chief financial officer, a quiet, brilliant numbers guy who was already rapidly scrolling through data on his laptop. I tossed the physical envelope onto the polished mahogany table. It landed with a soft, dismissive thud. I took my seat at the head of the table, smoothing the skirt of my dress. Harrison picked up the paper, skimmed the threatening demands from my father's attorney, and actually let out a genuine booming laugh. It echoed off the glass walls of the boardroom. Sterling and Vance Harrison chuckled, shaking his head as he tossed the papers back down. They always go for the theatrical intimidation tactics. It's all smoke and mirrors, Maya. This obscure loophole they're citing about the estate transfer is completely baseless. It wouldn't hold up for 10 seconds in front of a competent judge. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool wood. They are officially claiming I manipulated a confused man into giving me the deed for free. They are trying to build a narrative of elder abuse to invalidate the transfer. Harrison scoffed, opening a thick, heavily secured file folder resting in front of him. Which is entirely laughable because we have the ironclad paper trail proving otherwise. You didn't inherit that house for free, Maya. You didn't steal it, and you certainly didn't trick your grandfather. You purchased it directly from his trust. He slid a certified bank transfer record across the table toward me. Your grandfather's estate was drowning in toxic debt, Harrison reminded me smoothly, tapping the exact dollar amount on the page. He was 3 months away from foreclosure. You used your initial startup capital to buy the property at fair market value. Your cash infusion is what saved the rest of the family trust from total bankruptcy. It is the only reason your father received any inheritance at all. I looked down at the documents. It was irrefutable proof. A fact your father has clearly and conveniently omitted from his conversations with his new lawyers, Harrison added, leaning back and crossing his arms. He doesn't care about the facts, I said softly, my voice tight with resolve. He only cares about his ego. He wants the house because he promised it to Chloe, and he wants to punish me for having the audacity to say no. He's already calling my old freelance contacts, spreading malicious lies to destroy my reputation. He thinks he can starve me out of the neighborhood. Elias finally looked up from his laptop, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Sterling and Vance are notoriously expensive, Maya. Retaining them for a frivolous civil suit requires a massive upfront retainer. If your father is actively trying to ruin your livelihood over this, he's not just angry, he's highly motivated. And in the corporate world, highly motivated usually means desperate. I looked at Elias, feeling a cold, sharp realization settling over my shoulders. The emotional defense was over. I was entirely done reacting to their toxic games, and I was finished feeling sorry for a family that wanted to see me ruined. I don't just want to block this eviction, I said, my voice dropping into a register of absolute chilling authority. If we just swat this away with proof of purchase, my father will simply regroup. He will keep coming. He will find another legal angle. He will keep poisoning the extended family against me, and he will never stop trying to tear down my walls. Harrison leaned forward, his shark-like smile returning. So we don't just defend, we go on the offense. Exactly, I agreed, feeling a sudden rush of adrenaline. I want to dismantle his arrogance completely. I want to remove his ability to ever threaten my peace or my company again. Elias, I want you to run a deep, comprehensive diagnostic on his manufacturing firm. Look at his holdings, his cash flow, his vendors, everything. Elias nodded, his fingers already flying across his keyboard with practiced speed. Pulling up the preliminary corporate filings now. Give me a minute to bypass the public-facing shell companies and dig into the actual operational debt. The boardroom went dead silent. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the tiny cars moving silently through the city traffic far below. My father had spent his entire life presenting himself as an untouchable titan of industry. He looked down on everyone who didn't possess his level of wealth, especially me. He believed his money made him superior, and he used his financial status as a weapon to control my mother and my sister. If he was willing to spend tens of thousands of dollars on aggressive lawyers to steal my home, there had to be a reason he needed the equity so badly. Wait, Harrison muttered, leaning closer to Elias's screen, his brow furrowing deeply. Elias, pull up the debt structuring for his primary LLC. This can't be right. I turned away from the window. What is it? Harrison's eyes darted rapidly across the data cascading down the monitor. He tapped the screen, tracing a series of heavily obscured financial statements. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to pure, unadulterated shock. He slowly turned the laptop around so I could see the screen. Maya, Harrison said, his voice hushed with disbelief as he pointed to the glowing red figures. Your father hasn't just been padding his numbers. He has been aggressively leveraging everything he owns just to keep up appearances. I walked back to the table and looked at the data tracing the enormous lines of credit and the impending disastrous balloon payments. My attorney uncovered a massive hidden financial vulnerability in Dad's business that he had been hiding from the entire family. The glowing red figures on Elias's laptop screen painted a picture of absolute financial desperation. My father, the man who had spent his entire life lecturing me about fiscal responsibility and the prestige of the Williams name, was practically bankrupt. Elias adjusted his glasses, his fingers hovering over the keyboard with practiced precision. He has leveraged everything, Maya. The manufacturing firm is bleeding cash at an alarming rate. He's taken out 3 massive high-interest commercial loans just to keep the lights on and maintain his country club lifestyle. The profit margins he brags about at family dinners are entirely fabricated. If any of these primary creditors decide to call in his debt, his entire company collapses overnight. I stared at the staggering numbers cascading down the monitor. My father had built his entire identity on the illusion of untouchable wealth. He used that illusion as a weapon to control my mother, to spoil Chloe, and to make me feel utterly worthless. It all made horrific sense now. He was so desperate for a sudden cash infusion that he was willing to destroy his own daughter to steal my grandfather's house. He needed the equity in my property to save his own failing empire. "Can we buy it?" I asked, my voice dropping into a quiet, icy register that seemed to lower the temperature in the boardroom. Harrison smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips that promised absolute devastation. "The commercial debt, absolutely. It's currently held by a secondary equity firm downtown that would love to offload the risk before the quarter ends. We can purchase the primary notes quietly through a subsidiary of Apex Holdings. Your father won't have the slightest clue who actually holds the paper until we decide to look him in the eye and tell him." "Do it," I said without a second of hesitation. "Buy all of it. I want total, unmitigated control of his financial pulse." Elias nodded, immediately drafting the acquisition orders on his secure server. "Consider it done. And what about your sister? She's listed as a minor shareholder in his firm. Look into her personal assets." I instructed, turning away from the screen and gathering my purse. "Look under every single rock, Elias. I want to know exactly what she owes, who she owes it to, and how she is funding her lifestyle." Over the next 4 days, I initiated a slow burn trap. Operating purely through my corporate legal team, I maintained a strict, impenetrable silence with my family. I didn't respond to the aggressive, demanding letters from Sterling and Vance. I didn't answer the relentless phone calls from my father. I went to my office, finalized the multi-million-dollar debt acquisition, and drank my morning coffee in the quiet, absolute safety of my fortified home. But my silence only made them bolder. They interpreted my lack of response as paralyzing fear. They thought I was cowering in the dark, waiting for the inevitable blow. By Wednesday evening, the family group chat had devolved into a toxic spectacle of premature victory. I sat on my plush living room sofa, a cup of hot tea in my hands, watching the cruel messages roll across my screen. My Aunt Denise sent a string of clapping emojis, praising my father for protecting the family estate from greedy hands. My cousin Marcus posted a link to a cheap, run-down apartment complex on the edge of the city, tagging me with a mocking suggestion that I should apply for a lease immediately before my credit was ruined by the eviction. Then my phone vibrated with a direct message. It was from my mother. "Maya, your father has agreed to a final compromise. If you pack your things and vacate the premises quietly by Friday evening, he won't file the civil fraud suit. I will personally write you a check for $2,000 as a transition allowance so you aren't completely destitute. Please be sensible for once in your life. Do not force us to throw you out on the street." I stared at the glowing text message. $2,000. It was a pathetic, insulting sum offered under the guise of maternal charity. She genuinely believed she was throwing a generous lifeline to a drowning beggar, completely oblivious to the fact that her destitute daughter was a multi-millionaire CEO who had just quietly purchased her husband's corporate survival. The emotional sting of her text burned in my chest, a hot, familiar flash of betrayal that I had to force myself to breathe through. She wasn't trying to help me. She wasn't trying to be a mother. She was trying to buy my silent submission to save herself the social embarrassment of a messy public eviction. Every cruel insult, every mocking text, and every pathetic ultimatum only hardened the steel in my spine. I was done shedding tears for these people. I set my phone down on the glass coffee table and picked up my secure corporate line. I dialed my lead attorney. "Harrison," I said the moment he answered. "The trap is set. They think I'm breaking under the pressure." "Excellent." His deep, confident voice crackled over the speaker. "The debt transfer for your father's company officially cleared an hour ago. Apex Holdings is now his primary creditor. We hold the leash, Maya. What's the next move?" "Call Sterling and Vance," I instructed, running a hand over the soft fabric of my sofa. "Tell them their intimidation tactics worked. Tell them your client is terrified of the massive fraud lawsuit and wants to settle this out of court. Schedule a formal mediation session for tomorrow afternoon." Harrison let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "Baiting them into the boardroom. I love it. They are going to walk in there expecting a complete and total surrender. Let them expect it." I said, a cold, serene smile touching my lips. "Let them celebrate their victory tonight. Let my father puff out his chest and tell everyone he finally put his stubborn scapegoat of a daughter in her place." "And what about Chloe?" Elias's voice chimed in from the background of Harrison's office. "I finished digging into her personal finances, the promotional raise she was bragging about at your birthday dinner. It was completely fabricated. She's drowning in high-interest credit card debt, trying to maintain her polished influencer lifestyle." "Did you find her mortgage?" I asked, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "I did better than that," Elias replied, the sound of typing clicking rapidly over the line. "She took out a massive predatory variable rate mortgage to buy that luxury downtown condo 2 years ago. The lender is a small private equity group that we frequently do business with. When I made a few calls, they were more than happy to sell the note to Apex Holdings at a premium." I leaned back against the cushions, feeling a profound, absolute sense of control wash over me. The golden child and the arrogant patriarch were now completely at my mercy, and they had absolutely no idea the ground had disappeared beneath their feet. "Secure the paperwork," I ordered, my voice firm and unwavering. "Bring everything to the mediation tomorrow. I want every single document sitting on that table when I walk into the room." I hung up the phone and walked into my kitchen to pour a glass of sparkling water. The house was quiet, secure, and entirely mine. The heavy oak doors and reinforced steel gates stood as a physical testament to the boundaries I had finally built against my family's toxicity. My phone buzzed again, vibrating violently against the granite countertop. It was an alert from a social media app. Chloe had just posted a new video to her public feed. I unlocked the screen and tapped the notification. Chloe's face immediately filled my display. She was sitting in the passenger seat of her expensive car, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and holding an iced latte. She was practically vibrating with smug, unrestrained joy. "Hey guys," Chloe cooed into the camera, tossing her blonde, streaked hair over her shoulder. "I have the most amazing news. I haven't officially announced this yet, but I am finally moving. The family is doing some major restructuring, and I am officially taking over my grandfather's historic estate." She paused to take a dramatic sip of her coffee, her lips curving into a malicious little smirk that I knew was aimed directly at me. "The current tenant is being formally evicted this week," she continued, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "It's been a huge legal mess, honestly. Some people just don't know when to let go of things that don't belong to them. but I just spent the entire afternoon picking out the most gorgeous custom furniture for the main living room. I cannot wait to show you guys the renovations." She ended the video by blowing an exaggerated kiss to the camera. I stood in my kitchen, the cool glass of water in my hand, and let out a quiet, genuine laugh. The absolute hubris was staggering. She was publicly claiming a $40 million corporate fortress that she couldn't even legally approach, let alone own. She was measuring the drapes for my house, bragging about her impending victory to thousands of strangers on the internet. She posted a smug video bragging about her new upcoming house, completely unaware of who held the mortgage to her current condo. The heavy glass doors of Sterling and Vance sealed shut behind me, instantly cutting off the ambient noise of the downtown traffic. I smoothed the lapels of my dark charcoal suit. It was a bespoke cut, entirely devoid of flashy designer logos, but tailored with a quiet, expensive precision that demanded absolute respect. Today wasn't about looking wealthy. It was about looking like the executioner. A silent paralegal escorted me down the long, mahogany-paneled hallway. My low heels sank into the plush carpet, making my approach completely noiseless. I didn't carry a briefcase. I didn't even bring a pen. Everything I needed for this battle was currently riding up the private freight elevator. I pushed open the door to the main conference room and stepped inside alone. My family was already arranged along one side of the massive oak table, looking like a perfectly curated portrait of arrogant success. My father sat at the exact center, radiating a smug, untouchable confidence. He adjusted his silk tie, his chest puffed out with the absolute certainty of a man who believed he had finally won the war. My mother sat to his left, her posture rigid and her lips pressed into a tight, patronizing smile. Chloe was on his right, casually scrolling through her smartphone. She barely glanced up when I entered, but the malicious, triumphant gleam in her eyes was unmistakable. She was probably already browsing online for more custom furniture to fill my living room. Sitting at the head of the long table was their aggressive attorney, Vance. He looked me up and down, a weary, condescending sigh escaping his lips. He clearly thought I was just a terrified, broke freelancer showing up for her own financial slaughter. "Miss Williams," Vance said, not bothering to stand or offer his hand in greeting. "Take a seat. We have a lot of ground to cover this afternoon, and I have another meeting scheduled at 2. I pulled out the heavy leather chair opposite my father and sat down. I folded my hands neatly on the polished wood and looked directly into my father's eyes. I didn't say a single word. I let the absolute silence stretch until it became a heavy physical weight in the air-conditioned room. Vance cleared his throat, clearly annoyed by my lack of visible intimidation. He slid a thick, legally bound document across the smooth surface of the table. It stopped precisely an inch from my folded hands. "This is a standard surrender agreement," Vance explained, tapping the top page with an expensive gold pen. "Your father has graciously authorized me to halt the impending civil fraud lawsuit against you. In exchange, you will sign over the quitclaim deed to the property immediately. He's also being incredibly generous regarding the back rent," my mother chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial maternal sweetness. "We aren't going to charge you for the 3 years you squatted there, Maya. We just want to put this ugly business behind us and heal as a family." Chloe finally set her phone face down on the table. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands with a mocking, exaggerated pout. "You should really thank Dad, Maya," Chloe purred. "A real lawsuit would bankrupt you in a week. I mean, how many cheap websites would you have to design just to pay the initial filing fees? This is honestly the best thing that could happen to you. Plus, that historic house is just way too big for a single woman to manage anyway." Every cruel syllable she spoke would have crushed me a few years ago. I would have shrunk down in my chair, desperate to avoid the blinding spotlight of their collective disdain. I would have signed anything just to make the relentless mocking stop. But today, her insults felt like hollow echoes. They were throwing tiny stones at a fortified wall they couldn't even comprehend. I let her words hang in the silence, I didn't defend my career. I didn't rise to the bait. My serene silence seemed to irritate my father deeply. He apparently needed me to beg for his manufactured mercy. He leaned heavily across the table, fixing me with a cold, authoritative glare. "This is about respect, Maya." My father lectured, his voice dropping into that familiar, menacing register he had always used to control our household. "This is about understanding the family hierarchy and finally knowing your place. You thought you could pull a fast one on a dying, confused old man. You thought you could steal the legacy that rightfully belongs to me." He pointed a thick, angry finger directly at the surrender agreement resting in front of me. "You are a child playing in an adult's world," he growled. "You have no real assets. You have no leverage. You have absolutely nothing but the cheap clothes on your back. Pick up the pen, sign the paper, and hand over the keys to my house. If you do it right now, I might still let you attend Thanksgiving dinner next month." I looked down at the thick document, then back up at my father. I offered him a polite, chillingly empty smile. "I am not signing that," I said quietly. Vance let out a sharp, exasperated laugh. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, shaking his head like he was dealing with a remarkably stubborn toddler. "Miss Williams," Vance warned, his tone turning openly hostile. "Do not test my patience today. I will bury you in aggressive litigation. I will tie you up in civil court for a decade. I will bleed you dry with legal fees until you are living on the street. You simply do not have the financial stamina to fight a firm like mine." Just as Vance finished his grand threat, the heavy glass door of the conference room swung open. The smug, oppressive atmosphere in the room shattered in an instant. Harrison Bradley walked in. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were two of the most ruthless, highly respected corporate litigators in the city. They moved with the synchronized predatory grace of apex hunters entering a remarkably small cage. Harrison was wearing an immaculate dark navy suit. He carried a sleek leather briefcase, which he placed gently onto the table right next to me. He didn't spare a single glance for my parents or my sister. His sharp, calculating eyes locked directly onto Vance. Vance froze completely. The arrogant color instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. As a high-powered downtown attorney, Vance knew exactly who Harrison Bradley was. He knew that Harrison didn't take pro bono cases, and he certainly didn't represent struggling broke freelancers. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded, his voice loud and blustering, completely oblivious to his own lawyer's sudden paralyzing panic. "Who are these people, Maya? I told you this was a closed family mediation." "These are my attorneys," I said, leaning back comfortably in my leather chair. Harrison unclasped his briefcase with a sharp metallic snap that echoed loudly across the silent room. He pulled out a thick stack of pristine, legally bound documents and began distributing them across the table with methodical precision. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Harrison said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying, polite authority. "We represent Apex Holdings, LLC, and its chief executive officer, Maya Williams." My mother let out a small, confused gasp. Chloe blinked rapidly, looking from Harrison to me as if we were suddenly speaking a foreign language. "Apex Holdings," my father scoffed, a nervous, jagged edge finally creeping into his arrogant tone. "That's a shell company. It's a fake LLC she made up on the internet to hide my father's house. Vance, tell them to get out of this room." But Vance didn't speak. He was staring in absolute horror at the documentation Harrison had just placed directly in front of him. His hands were actually shaking as he flipped through the dense pages. "It is not a shell company, Richard," Harrison corrected smoothly, deliberately refusing to use my father's respectful honorific. "Apex Holdings is a fully capitalized commercial real estate firm with current assets exceeding $40 million. And as my colleague is currently showing your grossly misinformed counsel, my client didn't steal your father's property." Harrison slid a certified bank transfer record across the polished wood, stopping it right in front of my father. "She bought it," Harrison stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. She purchased the estate from the family trust 3 years ago at fair market value. Her massive cash infusion is the only reason your family trust didn't collapse into total bankruptcy. You have absolutely no legal claim to the property, the land, or the structure." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the distinct sound of a massive, fragile ego completely shattering. My father stared at the bank records, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. His eyes darted frantically across the undeniable proof of my wealth, the multi-million-dollar corporate valuation, and the elite legal team standing at my shoulder. Chloe looked like she was going to be physically sick. The smugness was entirely erased from her features, replaced by a hollow, terrified realization that her promised luxury mansion was a complete illusion. My mother pressed her trembling hands to her mouth, staring at me, as if she had never actually seen me before in her entire life. Vance slowly closed the heavy folder. He looked at my father with a mixture of intense professional fury and deep regret. He knew he had been completely outclassed. He had been baited into a legal trap by clients who had arrogantly lied to him about their target's actual resources. "Richard," Vance muttered, his voice hoarse and strained. "You told me she was broke." "She is," my father yelled, panic finally breaking through his paralysis. He pointed a shaking, desperate finger at me. "She's lying. This is a trick. She is a freelance web designer. She doesn't have $40 million. I sat forward, resting my arms comfortably on the table. I looked at the man who had tormented and belittled me for 3 decades, feeling nothing but a cool, unshakable peace. "The house is mine," I said, my voice cutting through his frantic panic like a blade. "The eviction notice is entirely void. If you or your daughter ever approach my property again, my legal team will have you arrested for criminal trespassing." My father slumped back in his chair, his chest heaving as he stared blindly at the paperwork. He was completely defeated, his primary weapon of legal intimidation utterly neutralized in a matter of minutes. But I wasn't finished. I didn't just come to this mediation room to defend my home. I came here to permanently dismantle him. I gave Harrison a subtle, silent nod. Harrison reached back into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a separate heavy manila folder sealed with red, tamper-evident tape. He walked slowly around the edge of the conference table, his footsteps muffled by the carpet, and stopped right beside my father's chair. The entire room watched in breathless, suffocating silence. My lawyer handed Dad a separate sealed folder, the formal notice that his company's debt had been called in. The heavy manila folder sat on the polished mahogany table, a glaring red, tamper-evident seal stark against the paper. For a long moment, the only sound in the boardroom was the low, steady hum of the air conditioning. My father stared at the package. His chest was rising and falling with jagged, uneven breaths. He looked at Harrison, then at me, the last remnants of his arrogance battling with a rising, suffocating panic. He reached out with a trembling hand and tore the red tape. The tense silence broke as he pulled out the crisp, legally bound notice. I watched his eyes dart across the top paragraph. I saw the exact second his brain processed the corporate letterhead, the debt acquisition details, and the irrefutable demand for immediate payment in full. All the color drained from his face. He looked as if the blood in his veins had instantly turned to ice water. "This," my father stammered. The heavy paper shook violently in his grip, rattling the silence of the room. "This says my commercial loans have been acquired. It says they are calling in the primary debt. Default means immediate liquidation of my company." He slammed his hand down on the table, producing a frantic, desperate sound. He leaned forward, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Who did this? Who bought my debt? Tell me the name of the holding company right now." I remained perfectly still. I let his panic wash over me, serving as a stone wall against his crashing waves. I didn't offer a single word of comfort, nor did I reveal my connection to Apex Holdings. I simply watched the man who had tormented my entire life realize his empire was built on sand. Vance, his aggressive attorney, leaned over to read the document. He let out a low, defeated breath. Without asking for permission, Vance began packing his expensive gold pen and legal pads into his leather briefcase. As a seasoned downtown litigator, he knew a sinking ship when he saw one. My mother covered her mouth with her trembling hands, letting out a stifled, terrified sob. "Richard, what does that mean? Liquidation? What about the house? What about our cars?" "It means we are ruined, Eleanor!" my father roared. His voice cracked with a terrifying, uncharacteristic desperation. He turned back to Harrison, his face flushing a dangerous shade of purple. "You tell this anonymous CEO that I need a meeting. I need an extension. They cannot legally execute a hostile takeover without a transition period." Harrison closed his briefcase with a sharp final snap. "They can, Richard, and they have. Have a pleasant afternoon." I stood up smoothly, adjusting the lapels of my charcoal suit. I didn't spare my family a second glance as I walked out through the heavy glass doors, leaving them drowning in the sudden violent collapse of their pristine reality. Over the next 72 hours, absolute chaos consumed my family. I didn't have to be in the same room to watch the dominoes fall. The shockwaves rippled through every single corner of our shared world. Operating from the quiet safety of my fortified home, I received daily updates from Elias on the financial dismantling of my father's business. Vendors were freezing his accounts. Creditors were calling non-stop. The illusion of the untouchable Williams' wealth was evaporating into thin air. Then the collateral damage hit my sister. On Thursday afternoon, my phone lit up with a barrage of notifications. It wasn't from my legal team, but from my cousin's social media feed. There was a blurry video posted from a high-end designer boutique downtown. I tapped the screen and watched Chloe standing at a register. Her face was a mask of absolute paralyzing humiliation. She was holding a stack of luxury handbags, arguing frantically with the cashier. "Try it again," Chloe demanded, her voice shrill and echoing through the quiet store. "There has to be a mistake with the machine. My father is Richard Williams. That card has no limit." The cashier looked deeply uncomfortable but resolute. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The card is coming up as frozen by the primary account holder. We cannot complete the transaction." Chloe grabbed her purse and practically ran out of the boutique, leaving the expensive leather bags behind on the counter. My father had completely cut her off. In a desperate, frantic bid to save cash and halt his financial bleeding, the golden child had been abruptly stripped of her endless allowance. The reality of their collapse was no longer just numbers on a page. It was a highly public, undeniable humiliation. My family group chat, which had been so eager to mock my impending eviction just days earlier, went entirely terrifyingly silent. The gloating stopped abruptly. The cruel jokes vanished. My aunt stopped sending clapping emojis, praising my father's business acumen. My cousin deleted the passive-aggressive posts about my living situation. They were all entirely too busy drowning to throw stones. Late Friday evening, the silence was finally broken. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing quarterly projections for my real estate acquisitions, when my personal cell phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed my father's name in bright white letters. I let it ring 3 times. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, centering myself, before I finally slid my finger across the screen. "Maya," my father breathed into the receiver. His voice was completely unrecognizable. The booming, arrogant patriarch who had demanded my surrender at the steakhouse was entirely gone. In his place was a broken, terrified old man. He sounded breathless, remarkably small, and utterly desperate. "Hello, Dad," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Maya, please don't hang up," he pleaded. The words rushed out of him in a panicked, uncoordinated tumble. "I know we have had our differences. I know things got heated at the mediation, but I am begging you to listen to me." I sat back against my stool, staring at the reinforced steel of my front door. I'm listening. He swallowed hard, producing a ragged, ugly sound over the line. My business is going under Maya. An aggressive holding company bought up all my commercial debt, and they are demanding immediate payment. If I don't give them a massive cash injection by Monday morning, they are going to liquidate everything. The company, my retirement fund, your mother's cars. We will be left with absolutely nothing. He paused, taking a shaky, profound breath, preparing to deliver the ultimate hypocrisy. I need a personal loan, Maya, he whispered, his voice cracking with tears he refused to shed. You own Grandpa's house free and clear. The land alone is worth millions now. I need you to take out an equity line of credit against the property and loan the cash to me, just to bridge the gap until I can stabilize the firm. I closed my eyes, letting the sheer, unadulterated audacity of his request wash over me. It sent a cold, sharp shiver down my spine. This was the man who had spent my entire childhood telling me I was a useless burden. Just a week ago, he had hired an aggressive lawyer to terrify me into homelessness. He had systematically called my former freelance clients to destroy my professional reputation. He had treated me like an inconvenient parasite that needed to be exterminated. Now facing his own unmitigated ruin, the mighty patriarch wanted me to mortgage the very home he had just tried to steal. He was begging the scapegoat to save his fragile, crumbling ego. We are blood, Maya, he pleaded, employing the heavy, toxic emotional manipulation my mother usually favored. Blood is thicker than water. We are family. You can't just stand by and watch us lose everything. Please, you have to help us save the family name. You owe us that much. I opened my eyes, staring at the dark, polished stone of my kitchen counter. I let his desperate, hollow words hang in the quiet air. I searched my heart for a shred of pity or a lingering sense of familial obligation. I found absolutely nothing. I only felt the steady, unwavering resolve of a trap finally snapping shut. I won't mortgage my property, Dad, I said, my voice smooth, even, and perfectly detached. Maya, please, he sobbed aloud, all pretense of his carefully cultivated dignity vanishing into thin air. I will pay you back with interest, I swear to you. Don't do this to me. But, I interrupted cleanly, cutting off his frantic begging. I might be able to help you in a different way. His breath hitched on the other end of the line. How anything, Maya? Tell me. My legal team has extensive connections in the corporate sector, I said smoothly, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the cool granite. I know exactly who bought your debt. I know the holding company, and more importantly, I have a direct line to their CEO. You do? He gasped, a desperate, pathetic ember of hope sparking in his sudden intake of breath. Can you talk to them for me? Can you ask them for an extension? I don't speak for them, I replied calmly, but I can arrange an introduction. You can plead your case to the CEO directly face to face. My father let out a long, shuddering sigh of profound relief. He honestly believed he had found a legitimate lifeline. He genuinely believed that his charm, his tailored suits, and his seasoned business acumen could talk this mysterious executive into a favorable deal. Yes, he agreed eagerly. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Maya. Thank you so much. Where is their office? I will drive there first thing Monday morning. Not Monday, I said, pulling up a digital invitation on my tablet. The CEO is notoriously elusive. The only way you will get FaceTime this week is at the downtown charity gala tomorrow night. I know you and Mom already have tickets. The gala, he repeated, sounding slightly thrown by the venue. Yes, we secured tickets months ago, but are you sure they will meet with me there? I guarantee it, I said, a slow, chilling smile spreading across my face. Thank you, Maya. I mean it, he whispered, his overwhelming relief radiating through the phone. I will see you there. I disconnected the call, placing the phone softly onto the marble island. I looked out the reinforced tinted windows of my fortified home, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The final piece of the board was set. I had absolute control, and they were walking willingly into their own highly public destruction. I agreed to introduce them to the CEO of the creditor company at a major high society gala that weekend. The Crystal Ballroom at the Pierre Hotel was a masterclass in aggressive old money opulence. Cascading chandeliers dripped with thousands of crystal prisms, casting a warm golden glow over the city's most powerful elite. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated silently through the crowd, balancing heavy silver trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, steady hum of classical strings playing from a balcony above. I stepped through the gilded arches and let the atmosphere wash over me. I wasn't wearing my usual understated corporate armor tonight. I was wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that cascaded to the floor, hugging my frame perfectly before pooling at my feet. The color was rich and undeniable, paired with a simple, flawless diamond drop necklace that caught the light with every step I took. For a moment, I just stood near the grand staircase and observed the room. I felt a deep, resonant calm settling into my bones, anchoring me to the marble floor. This was my arena. I had funded a significant portion of this charity gala through a subsidiary of Apex Holdings, quietly securing my position as the evening's primary benefactor. I took a slow sip of sparkling water and scanned the massive ballroom. It didn't take long to find them. My family was huddled near a towering floral arrangement by the east wall, radiating a frantic, nervous energy that practically vibrated through the air. My father was wearing his vintage black tuxedo, but the confident swagger he usually carried was completely gone. He was constantly adjusting his cuffs, wiping a thin sheen of sweat from his forehead despite the heavy air conditioning. His eyes darted frantically toward the VIP section and the entrance. He was desperately searching for the elusive CEO who held his entire life in her hands. My mother stood rigidly beside him, gripping a champagne flute like a lifeline. Her smile was brittle and manufactured, stretched tight across her face as she nodded politely at passing acquaintances. She was working overtime to project the illusion of the untouchable Williams' wealth, absolutely terrified that someone in this room might see through the cracks of their collapsing empire. And then there was Chloe. She was wearing a heavily sequined silver dress that felt entirely too loud and desperate for the elegant room. She was shifting her weight anxiously from foot to foot, her usual golden child arrogance replaced by a quiet, suffocating panic. Without my father's endless credit limits to fund her lifestyle, her polished influencer facade was rapidly falling apart. She looked exhausted, terrified of the financial ruin waiting for them on Monday morning. I watched them pretend. I watched them perform the exhausting choreography of keeping up appearances while their world burned to ash. I felt a brief fleeting shadow of pity, but the memory of the eviction notice and the cruel phone calls to my former clients quickly extinguished it. I began to walk toward them, my heels silent against the plush-patterned carpet. I didn't rush. I moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who owns the ground they stand on. Chloe saw me first. Her eyes widened, traveling up the length of my emerald gown. For a fraction of a second, genuine shock washed over her features. But her deeply ingrained conditioning quickly took over. Her brain simply could not process the idea that her scapegoat sister belonged in this room as an equal. "Oh my God," Chloe hissed, grabbing my mother's arm and pointing a manicured finger in my direction. "What is she doing here?" My parents turned in unison. The color instantly drained from my mother's face, leaving her skin an ashen gray. She set her champagne flute down on a passing tray with a sharp, panicked clatter. My father's jaw clenched, a thick vein pulsing dangerously at his temple. He immediately stepped in front of my mother, trying to physically shield their fragile social standing from my presence. I stopped a few feet away from them, offering a polite, chillingly serene smile. "Maya, what is wrong with you?" my mother whispered harshly. She didn't dare raise her voice above a frantic hiss, terrified of drawing attention from the surrounding elite. "How did you get past security? Did you sneak through the service entrance? You cannot be here." "I walked through the front doors, Mom," I said smoothly. My father stepped closer, his face flushing a volatile shade of red. The desperation in his eyes was palpable. He looked frantically around the ballroom, terrified that the anonymous CEO he was supposed to meet might walk up and witness this family embarrassment. "You have completely lost your mind," my father growled, keeping his voice dangerously low. "This is a closed high society event. This is not one of your little freelance networking mixers. We are meeting someone incredibly important tonight, someone who holds the absolute future of this family in their hands. You are going to ruin everything." I smoothed the silk of my gown, letting his panic slide right off me. "I was invited." Chloe let out a sharp, mocking scoff. She looked me up and down, her lip curling with absolute disdain. She was drowning in debt and facing public humiliation, but she still couldn't resist the urge to step on my neck to make herself feel taller. "Invited," Chloe sneered, tossing her blonde-streaked hair over her shoulder. "Did the catering company need an extra set of hands? Is that a rental dress, Maya? Because you are going to owe a massive deposit if you spill appetizer sauce on it." She didn't wait for me to answer. She snapped her fingers at me, an ugly, demanding gesture that she had used to summon me since we were teenagers. "Since you're already here playing dress-up," Chloe commanded, jutting her chin toward the massive ice bar in the center of the room, "go fetch me a fresh glass of champagne. Make sure it's the vintage label, and stay out of sight. We cannot afford for anyone important to realize we are related to you tonight." A few years ago, the sheer disrespect would have crushed me. I would have felt the familiar burning sting of tears behind my eyes. I would have shrunk down, apologized, and quietly disappeared into the shadows to keep their pristine image intact. Tonight, I didn't feel an ounce of pain. I felt absolutely invincible. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my dress or my presence. I simply turned gracefully and walked toward a passing waiter. I picked up a delicate crystal flute filled with the most expensive vintage champagne in the room. I walked slowly back to my sister and extended my hand. Chloe snatched the glass from my fingers with a victorious, arrogant smirk. "At least you finally learned how to make yourself useful. Enjoy the drink, Chloe," I murmured, my voice soft and steady. "It might be the last vintage label you taste for a very long time." Before she could process the weight of my words, the ambient hum of the ballroom suddenly faded. The grand, towering double doors at the front of the hall were pulled shut by elite event security. The massive crystal chandeliers dimmed overhead, shifting the energy of the room from a cocktail hour into a focused, captive audience. A sharp, clear tone rang out from the stage speakers. My father visibly jumped. He adjusted his silk tie, his chest heaving with nervous, jagged breaths. He turned his back to me, completely leaning forward on his toes as he stared eagerly toward the brightly lit stage. "Quiet, all of you," my father snapped at my mother and sister. "The program is starting. The CEO should be making their entrance soon. We need to find their table immediately after the speech and beg for an extension." My mother nodded frantically, smoothing the front of her dress. "Just stay here in the corner, Maya," she whispered over her shoulder, not even bothering to look at me. "Do not move. Do not speak to anyone. Just let your father handle this." I didn't move. I stayed exactly where they wanted me, standing quietly in their shadow, watching the man who had tormented me prepare to beg for his life. The keynote speaker, a distinguished city official, stepped up to the polished acrylic podium. The ballroom erupted into polite, restrained applause. He smiled warmly, adjusting the microphone. "Good evening, distinguished guests, friends, and leaders of our beautiful city," the host began, his voice echoing clearly across the silent room. Tonight, we are here to celebrate incredible generosity. We are here to honor the power of building foundations that uplift our entire community. My father nodded along to the speech, a desperate, eager smile plastered across his face. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. He honestly believed he was moments away from using his charm and his tailored suit to talk his way out of total liquidation. But before we begin the main program, the host continued, his tone shifting into one of profound respect. We must acknowledge the extraordinary individual who made tonight possible, a visionary leader who has quietly transformed the landscape of commercial real estate and technology in our city. The crowd murmured with quiet excitement. My sister took a slow sip of her champagne, her eyes glued to the empty space near the podium. It is my absolute honor to introduce tonight's primary benefactor, the host announced, his voice rising with powerful enthusiasm. The host announces the CEO and founder of the acquiring firm, and the spotlight sweeps across the room to land squarely on Maya. The spotlight hit me, a brilliant, blinding circle of white light that cut through the dim ambiance of the crystal ballroom. The heavy, expectant silence of the crowd lasted for only a fraction of a second before thunderous applause erupted, echoing off the gilded ceiling. Beside me, the illusion of the Williams family dynasty shattered into a million irreparable pieces. My father actually stumbled backward, his polished dress shoes slipping against the patterned carpet. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked as though he might physically collapse. His mouth opened, but only a dry, wheezing sound escaped. My mother stared up at the stage, then back at me, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked like she had just seen a ghost. And Chloe, the golden child who had commanded me to fetch her a drink mere minutes ago, froze completely, her manicured fingers trembling so violently that the vintage champagne spilled over the rim of her crystal flute and splashed onto her cheap sequined dress. "No," my father gasped, shaking his head frantically. "No, that's a mistake. The spotlight is in the wrong place." I didn't offer him a single word of comfort or explanation. I simply turned to a passing waiter, placed Chloe's half-empty glass onto his silver tray, and began my walk to the stage. The sea of high society elites parted for me effortlessly. Senators, tech billionaires, and real estate moguls smiled and nodded respectfully as I passed. I moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a queen ascending her throne, the emerald silk of my custom gown whispering against the marble floors. I could feel my father's horrified gaze burning into my back, tracing every step I took away from the shadows he had forced me into and stepping directly into the center of the world he worshipped. When I reached the front of the ballroom, the host extended a warm, reverent hand, helping me up the final 2 stairs to the acrylic podium. The applause swelled again, a deafening wave of validation that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. I adjusted the microphone, looking out over the glittering sea of faces. It took me only a moment to find them. They were still huddled by the towering floral arrangement near the east wall, but they were no longer performing. They looked remarkably small. My father was clutching his chest, his knuckles white against his tuxedo lapels, struggling to process the impossible reality that his discarded scapegoat daughter was the mysterious apex CEO holding the deed to his home and the debt to his very life. "Thank you," I began, my voice ringing out clear, steady, and echoing with absolute authority across the silent ballroom. "It is a profound honor to stand before you tonight. When I founded Apex Holdings, I didn't just want to build a profitable tech acquisition firm. I wanted to build an institution rooted in genuine integrity, a quality that is far too rare in our modern corporate landscape. I kept my tone perfectly elegant, completely devoid of the rage that had fueled me for decades. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to hurl insults or throw a tantrum. My mere presence on this stage, bathed in light and power, was the ultimate, undeniable revenge. We are often taught that legacy is something we simply inherit. I continued pacing my words to let the weight of them settle over the room. We are told that names hold power, that bloodlines dictate worth. and that maintaining the facade of success is more important than doing the actual grueling work required to achieve it. But a true legacy isn't handed to you. It is built. It is built in the dark, without applause, by overcoming the environments and the people who tell you that you are fundamentally worthless. I shifted my gaze, locking eyes directly with my father across the expansive room. I watched him flinch, shrinking under the invisible crushing weight of my words. In the world of commercial acquisitions, we see the consequences of toxic leadership every single day. I said, my voice dropping into a cool, precise register. We see hollow empires built on unmitigated greed and profound arrogance. We see arrogant men who leverage their families, abuse their employees, and fabricate their profit margins just to keep up appearances at country clubs. They believe their power is an absolute right untouchable by consequence. But the market always corrects itself, and karma, much like debt, always comes due. My mother covered her face with her trembling hands. Chloe looked like she was hyperventilating, finally realizing exactly who held the predatory mortgage on her luxury downtown condo. At Apex Holdings, our mission is to acquire those failing, unethical structures and completely dismantle them, I announced, projecting a serene, devastating smile out to the crowd. We strip away the rot, we hold the arrogant accountable, and we restructure the foundation into something that actually brings value to this community. True power isn't about crushing those beneath you to make yourself feel tall. It's about having the quiet, absolute resources to ensure no one can ever put you in a corner again. I stepped back from the podium as the ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. The applause was a physical force, a tidal wave of respect from the most powerful people in the city. The host returned to the microphone, shaking my hand enthusiastically as the elite crowd rose to their feet. But from the corner of my eye, I saw a sudden violent movement near the floral arrangement. My father's mind was breaking. His fragile narcissistic ego simply could not process the total humiliating defeat unfolding in front of him. In his twisted, desperate reality, he saw his peers cheering for the Williams bloodline. He saw millions of dollars in equity standing on that stage, and his arrogant brain convinced him that he could still spin this narrative. He thought he could claim credit for my brilliance, publicly assert his dominance as the patriarch, and somehow weave my success into his failing empire. "That's my daughter!" My father suddenly roared, his voice cracking with a manic, unhinged desperation that sliced through the polite applause. He shoved past my mother, practically knocking her into a waiter, and began sprinting through the tables toward the front of the room. His face was purple, his tuxedo jacket flapping wildly as he bulldozed past startled billionaires and city officials. "I taught her everything. That's my flesh and blood." He bellowed, his eyes wild and completely disconnected from reality as he rushed the stage, his thick hands reaching frantically for the acrylic podium and the microphone. He didn't make it up the first step. Before his fingers could even graze the microphone stand, 3 members of the elite event security team materialized from the shadows. They intercepted him with terrifying synchronized precision, swiftly twisting his arms behind his back and violently restraining the mighty patriarch of the Williams family in front of the entire stunned ballroom. Part 12. Short title: The Fall. Summary. The immediate aftermath of the gala brings total karmic justice. Maya's father's business goes into receivership, completely dismantled by his own financial mismanagement and hubris. Without his wealth to hide behind, his arrogant facade crumbles, and the extended family, having seen the undeniable proof of Maya's success and her parents' deceit, turns their backs on him. Chloe is forced to move out of her luxury apartment and get a grueling entry-level job, her golden child status entirely revoked. The mother tries to backtrack, leaving pleading, tearful voicemails, begging Maya for financial help, and claiming she always knew Maya was special. Maya ignores them all, focusing her energy on her thriving business. and the healthy relationships she has cultivated outside her biological family. The villains are left with nothing but the reality of their own toxic choices. The frantic, unhinged sound of my father shouting faded into a pathetic echo as elite event security dragged him backward through the heavy gilded doors of the crystal ballroom. The silence that swept over the room in his wake was absolute. No one gasped. No one whispered. The city's most powerful elites, the very people my father had spent his entire life trying to impress, simply watched the complete, unmitigated destruction of Richard Williams in stunned fascination. I didn't smile and I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply offered a polite, serene nod to the host, stepped down from the acrylic podium, and walked gracefully out into the cool night air. The war wasn't just over. The battlefield had been completely leveled. By Monday morning, the theoretical damage of the gala became a brutal, undeniable reality. I sat in my spacious corner office at Apex Holdings sipping a hot espresso while Elias and Harrison executed the final liquidation orders with the ruthless precision of surgeons. The secondary creditors are in an absolute frenzy, Maya, Elias reported, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard. Smelling blood in the water after your father's public meltdown on Saturday, they all called in their notes at exactly 8 a.m. His manufacturing firm is officially in receivership. The court-appointed liquidators are at his headquarters right now, boxing up the files and changing the locks. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline. My father had built his entire identity on the illusion of untouchable wealth and intimidation. Without it, he was nothing. Over the next 48 hours, his arrogant facade crumbled into dust. Repo men arrived at the pristine suburban house he had rented to replace his foreclosed estate, unceremoniously hooking up his luxury sedans to tow trucks in broad daylight for all the neighbors to see. His country club memberships were revoked due to unpaid dues. He frantically tried to call his brothers, his business associates, and the extended family who had spent years applauding his cruelty. But the truth was out. They had all seen the irrefutable proof of my success and his parasitic deceit. The family group chat, once a relentless toxic barrage of mockery aimed at my supposed eviction, went dead. Aunt Denise, cousin Marcus, and everyone who had eagerly thrown stones at the family scapegoat completely turned their backs on him. They saw the sheer scale of my power, realized they had backed a sinking ship, and abandoned him to drown. He was a pariah stripped of his crown, and his kingdom left to wander the empty halls of a life he could no longer afford. Then came Chloe, the golden child who had spent her entire life insulated by my parents' toxic favoritism and endless credit limits, finally hit the concrete. On Wednesday afternoon, Apex Holdings officially finalized the foreclosure on her downtown luxury condo. She was formally evicted by the sheriff's department. There was no family safety net left to catch her. With her father completely bankrupt, the endless flow of cash she used to fund her polished influencer lifestyle dried up overnight. She tried to stream her eviction on social media, playing the tearful, victimized princess for her audience. But the internet is a notoriously unforgiving place. When court documents leaked, revealing that her luxury lifestyle was entirely funded by predatory variable rate loans and her father's failing business, her followers turned on her with vicious speed. The brand deals vanished. The sponsorships evaporated. I received a brief, highly satisfying update from Elias later that week. Chloe Williams, the girl who had sneered at me and commanded me to fetch her vintage champagne just days prior, was now wearing a stiff polyester uniform, working the cash register at a mid-tier fast fashion retail chain in the suburbs. She was spending her days folding sweaters, fetching shoes from the stockroom, and bowing her head to the exact type of working-class people she had spent her life mocking. Her golden child status had been entirely revoked by reality. My mother, true to her nature, chose a different tactic, pathetic backtracking desperation. With the family empire in ruins, she realized her only lifeline was the daughter she had spent 3 decades treating like a burden. My secure corporate line and personal cell phone began filling with lengthy, tearful voicemails. I sat in the plush comfort of my living room, the fire crackling warmly in the hearth, and listened to them play on speakerphone. Maya, darling, please pick up. My mother's voice trembled through the speaker, dripping with a manufactured, cloying maternal warmth that made my skin crawl. Your father has completely lost his mind. He's yelling at everyone, and the bank is threatening to take my jewelry. I had no idea things were this bad, sweetheart. You have to believe me. I always knew you were special. I always told him you were going to do great things. Please, we are family. Blood is thicker than water. I just need a small transition loan to get a luxury hotel suite until this blows over. Just $50,000, Maya, for your mother. I didn't delete the voicemails, but I never answered them. I let them sit in the digital void, a lasting testament to her absolute staggering hypocrisy. She was still trying to gaslight me, still trying to rewrite history to cast herself as a supportive victim. But her emotional manipulation, which used to crush my spirit, now held absolutely no power over me. She was a ghost speaking to a woman who no longer existed. I focused my energy where it truly belonged. Under my leadership, Apex Holdings acquired 3 new, highly profitable tech startups. I spent my evenings hosting quiet, joyful dinners with Harrison Elias and the genuine, loyal friends I had cultivated outside the toxic shadow of my biological family. I had successfully excised the rot from my life. The villains were left with nothing but the bleak, terrifying reality of their own toxic choices. I had achieved absolute, unshakable peace in the fortified mansion that my grandfather had intended for me, or so I thought. It was a quiet Thursday night nearly a month after the gala. A heavy, relentless rainstorm was lashing against the reinforced tinted windows of my home, casting long, watery shadows across the polished hardwood floors. I was curled up on the oversized living room sofa with a cup of chamomile tea, reviewing a quarterly acquisitions report, enjoying the deep, impenetrable silence of a fortress no one could breach. The perimeter security system was fully armed. The steel gates at the end of the driveway were locked tight. Then the profound silence of the house was violently shattered. Thud, thud, thud. A frantic, heavy, desperate knocking echoed directly from my solid oak front doors. I froze the teacup, halting halfway to my lips. It wasn't the polite electronic chime of the security gate intercom at the edge of the property. Someone had completely bypassed the outer perimeter. Someone had slipped past the cameras and the steel gates in the dead of night. Someone was standing on my private porch, beating their fists against the reinforced wood of my front door in the pouring rain. The relentless pounding against the solid oak resonated through the quiet cavern of my entryway. It was an erratic, frantic noise, completely devoid of the entitled, demanding knocks my father used to employ when he felt he owned the world. I stood frozen in my living room for a fraction of a second, the delicate porcelain of my teacup warming my palms as the heavy rainstorm raged outside the reinforced windows. My perimeter security system hadn't triggered an alarm. That meant whoever was out there had abandoned their vehicle and walked the half-mile up the winding, muddy driveway in the torrential downpour after finding the outer steel gates firmly locked. I set my tea down gently on the marble kitchen island. The profound silence of my home wrapped around me like a protective, impenetrable cloak as I walked down the wide hardwood hallway. I didn't feel a flicker of fear. I felt a deep, absolute stillness. I tapped the glowing security panel mounted beside the heavy front doors, bringing the exterior high-definition camera feeds to life on the screen. Through the night vision lens distorted by thick sheets of driving rain, 2 figures huddled miserably under the shallow awning of my porch. It took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. It was my father Richard and my sister Chloe. They looked completely unrecognizable. The mighty patriarch who had always worn bespoke Italian suits like a suit of armor to intimidate those around him was currently drowning in a cheap, ill-fitting nylon rain jacket. His posture was completely shattered. His hair, usually styled with immaculate, arrogant precision, was plastered to his forehead and neck in wet, graying strips. Beside him, the former golden child looked entirely stripped of her polished influencer glamour. Chloe was shivering violently, her makeup smeared across her pale cheeks, in dark, muddy rivers, clutching a soaked canvas tote bag to her chest like a shield. They didn't look like the towering architects of my lifelong misery. Shivering in the cold, completely exposed to the elements, they looked remarkably pathetically average. I disengaged the electronic deadbolts. The heavy metallic clack sounded like gunshots in the quiet house. I pulled the thick oak door open just enough to stand on the threshold, keeping the warm golden light of my home from spilling too far out into the consuming darkness of the storm. The bitter wind whipped immediately across the porch, carrying the harsh scent of wet asphalt and pure desperation. "Maya!" my father gasped, his voice cracking violently over the roar of the pouring rain. He lunged forward instinctively, driven by a desperate need for shelter, but I didn't flinch, and I certainly didn't step aside. He stopped dead a foot away from me, hitting an invisible, impenetrable wall of pure, unyielding authority that I now projected effortlessly. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice was a calm, serene contrast to the chaotic tempest aggressively battering them. "We had to walk," Chloe sobbed, her teeth visibly chattering as she wrapped her arms around her wet torso. "The rideshare driver wouldn't wait at the gate in the mud. It's freezing out here, Maya. Please just let us inside. Look at us. My shoes are completely ruined." Even now, standing on the absolute brink of total ruin, stripped of her golden child status and her luxury condo, she was whining about her shoes. I looked at her feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no familial warmth, no lingering resentment. Just a clinical, detached observation of a stranger who had made her own bed. "You are trespassing on private property," I stated evenly, turning my gaze back to the broken man beside her. "Maya, I am begging you," my father pleaded. He reached out his trembling, waterlogged hand, hovering inches from my arm, too terrified of my new power to actually touch me. "We have nowhere else to go tonight. The receivership lawyers took everything I had left. They locked the doors to the suburban rental house this morning. Your mother is staying on a small cot in her sister's basement across town, and she refused to let us in. Denise wouldn't even open the door." "I am sorry." My father choked out the words, sounding foreign, jagged, and thoroughly unpracticed coming from his throat. "I was wrong about you. I was so blind and arrogant. I didn't see what you were building under my nose. I didn't see your brilliance in the corporate sector. You are my flesh and blood, my brilliant daughter. You proved me wrong. You won, Maya. You won the war. You have everything. Just, please give us a second chance. Let me work for you. Let me help you manage the Apex portfolio. With my experience and your capital, we can rebuild the Williams legacy together." I listened to his monologue, dissecting every desperate syllable. He wasn't apologizing for the decades of emotional abuse. He wasn't expressing genuine remorse for treating me like a worthless scapegoat while elevating Chloe to a pedestal. He was apologizing because his bank accounts were empty and I had outplayed him. He was begging for a job, a piece of my multi-million-dollar empire, a way to crawl back into the comfort of high society wealth by grabbing onto my coattails. He was mourning the loss of his money, not the loss of his relationship with his daughter. "I will do anything," Chloe chimed in. Stepping closer, her voice shifting into a pathetic, wheedling tone born of pure financial panic. "I hate my new retail job, Maya." The manager screams at me over folded sweaters. "It's so humiliating having to serve people I used to ignore. I'm your sister. We can start over right now. I'll be your personal assistant. I'll promote your company on my remaining social channels. I'm so sorry I laughed at your clothes and your website designs. I need my life back. We are family. I stood in the doorway listening to their hollow, transaction-driven pleas as the rain relentlessly battered the roof of the porch. The storm was washing away the last lingering shadows of my past, leaving behind a crisp, undeniably clear reality. I stepped fully onto the threshold, letting the freezing mist kiss the skin of my face, standing tall and unshakable in front of the people who had spent 30 years actively trying to make me feel small. Family, I repeated slowly, letting the word roll off my tongue as if testing a foreign, meaningless language. You both keep using that word as if it is a magic key designed to unlock my vault. It's blood, Maya, my father pleaded, wrapping his wet arms around himself as a violent shiver wrecked his frame. No, Richard. I corrected him smoothly, cleanly, and permanently severing the paternal title I had used my entire life. Family is about respect. It is about loyalty. It is about showing up for the people you care about, not because of the resources they can magically provide you, but because of who they are as human beings. I took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing the crisp, rain-washed air deep into my lungs, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound closure. You lost the right to use the word family a long time ago. I continued, my voice ringing out clear, cold, and absolute over the howling storm. But you permanently lost the right to be in my life the night of my 30th birthday. You sat at that expensive steakhouse bought with money you didn't actually have and told me I was a useless burden. You told me I was an embarrassing failure. You tried to throw me into the streets to save your own fragile ego. We were desperate, my father cried out, tears finally mixing with the rain on his cheeks. And now you are destitute, I replied without a single shred of malice or rage, simply stating a universal, unavoidable fact. That is the direct karmic consequence of your own greed. You built your house on toxicity, manipulation, and lies, and it collapsed under its own weight. I built my foundation on granite. You do not get to seek shelter in the very fortress you actively tried to burn to the ground. Chloe let out a loud, ugly wail, covering her face with her muddy, trembling hands, her sobs lost in the wind. My father just stood there, his mouth opening and closing silently, the horrifying realization finally setting in behind his eyes. There was no emotional manipulation left to employ. No familial strings left to aggressively pull. The bank was permanently closed and the bridge was entirely burned. The private gate security will arrive in exactly 3 minutes to escort you off the premises. I informed them calmly, stepping backward into the warm, illuminated hallway of my home. If you or anyone in your orbit ever approaches this property, my corporate office, or me again, my legal team will have you arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Goodbye, Richard. Maya, wait, please! My father screamed, reaching his hand frantically toward the golden light spilling from my foyer. I didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. I grabbed the heavy brass handle and pulled the thick oak door shut, throwing the steel deadbolts with a resounding final snap. Instantly, the howling wind, the desperate shouting, and the suffocating toxicity of my past were entirely severed. I stood in my quiet foyer for a long moment, closing my eyes and listening to the absolute beautiful silence of my sanctuary. I had done it. I had protected my grandfather's legacy, built an impenetrable corporate empire, and successfully excised the villains from my life forever. I turned away from the door and walked slowly down the long hallway, letting the soft glow of the wall sconces guide me. As I approached the grand dining room, the profound silence was replaced by the warm, melodic sound of genuine laughter and the cheerful clinking of crystal glasses. I paused in the arched doorway, taking in the scene. The long mahogany table was set beautifully glowing under the ambient light of the grand crystal chandelier. Elias was in the middle of telling a brilliant animated story about a recent corporate acquisition, making Harrison throw his head back in a deep, booming laugh. My closest friends, my chosen family sat around the table, their faces bright with joy, authentic connection, and unwavering mutual respect. Harrison caught my eye from across the room. His smile softened immediately, carrying a silent, grounding support that I had never experienced with my blood relatives. "Everything all right at the door, Maya?" he asked, his deep voice carrying easily over the gentle ambient music playing in the background. I looked at the beautiful, vibrant life I had carefully cultivated. I looked at the people who respected my brilliance, who stood fiercely by my side, and who celebrated my victories without an ounce of jealousy or ulterior motives. "Everything is perfect," I said, a genuine, radiant smile blooming across my face. I walked to the head of the table, picking up my crystal flute filled with sparkling vintage champagne. The room quieted respectfully, turning their warm, expectant faces toward me as I stood at the head of my own table. "To new foundations," I said softly, raising my glass to the light. The screen fades to black as Maya raises a glass with her true friends, leaving the audience with the powerful realization that living beautifully is the best revenge.